Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you believe changing our workplaces can change our world, we got a real treat for you. You know, I'm a big fan of Rebecca and Matt, and you know I'm a big fan of behavioral science. We're going to be diving deep on that today. A couple of quick announcements. We're going to run through these. As we're running through the announcements, as always, like I like to say, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and connect with at least one person today. So if you're not inviting your team to this thing, you absolutely should. This is Too Fun. Hey, Natalie, how's it going? This is Too Fun every Thursday where we get together to sharpen our swords, sharpen our saws, to get smarter, to get better, and get that shot in the arm because we have a tough job and the job we do matters. So podcasts, books are always top of mind for me. I was listening to the Great Women of Compliance podcast this week. They had Carolina on. It's a really great episode. They talk about Eastern Europe compliance, stuff going on in the Ukraine. So if you're not listening to these podcasts constantly, you absolutely should when you're walking your dog or you're doing your dishes. Speaking of podcasts, the fastest growing ethics and compliance podcast is the Ethics Experts Top 2% Global Podcast. We had Sarah Cole on, really great conversation. She has such great energy and she brings a lot to our community. So I encourage you to check that out. And she talks a lot about these groups that she runs in England and the benefits that come from getting leaders together. As always, the world famous Ethico book giveaway is in full effect. We are still pushing Jay's book, getting a lot of great feedback from that. We, of course, are giving 5 of these out. So double your chances by sharing something on social. If you love the Ethicsverse, put it out there. We want to grow this community some more. It really is our greatest asset, our ability to share what we've been through, to share our failures, to share what's working so that we don't get caught in that reinventing the wheel trap. Like I always say, you get no credit for reinventing the wheel in this life. You do get credit, though, if you can improve your program by moving on over to Ethico. So Ethico's ecosystem is the answer to the legacy providers out there that, not my words, some of you feel like they hate you. Well, if you don't want to feel like your vendor hates you, where you want to really feel like we're helping push you forward, then check out Ethico. We have a next-gen tool called the Ethico ecosystem that drives a lot more engagement across the organization, more manager engagement, more workforce engagement. That drives a lot more efficiency. We help folks find extra heads on their team. They can do a lot more with what they have, and ultimately demonstrate the effectiveness that keeps a lot of us up at night. So if you wonder how much it costs 15% less than what you're paying with Navex or Conversant or EQS or OneTrust or whoever that is right now. I want to share this thing because, you know, I love sharing quotes. Listen to this quote. I know that if I was with Navex or OneTrust, we probably wouldn't even have the opportunity to fix this. So thank you for the customer-centric service. I know that while perhaps we still have some fairly significant teething problems, but the fact that you're willing to be responsive and available means an awful lot to us. Angela, you have been a great resource, and I'm so grateful for all the efforts you've put into making my life simpler. Imagine that. Imagine your vendor making your life simpler. Okay, commercial over. Check us out. We have up to a year free. And we also are coming to your city this year, Ethicsverse Live. We're coming live in effect. We're going to have a mix of roundtables and forums across the country this year. So the first one is in about a month here in Charlotte. So check out the website and you can see what those dates are and what those cities are. Look at this upgrade. We got a killer group for you. We got Rebecca. You got me. How's it going? New jawline for me. And the one and only Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance. How you guys doing?
We're doing very well, Nick. How are you?
Very good. All right. So we're talking about beyond policy, how behavioral science can drive E&C and HR.
Awesome.
I'll do a quick recap of it for Nick, and then I'll introduce Rebecca. So everybody who is joining us, thank you very much. And we are here today, like Nick said, to talk about behavioral science. And with us to talk about that is Rebecca Rem, who is the compliance officer and director at the Olympus Corporation of the Americas. And Rebecca actually has a presentation with some slides, and we're going to go through that. We're going to do our usual back and forth and discussion. And so everybody listening, if you do have comments, if you do have questions, I think at this point, most of you know the drill. You can pop them into the attendee chat at any time. We'll set aside a dedicated time for Q&A at the end. If, however, you ask an exceptionally on-point and relevant question, we might just put it to Rebecca and Nick on the fly as they come to us. But we are going to talk about the theoretical frameworks behind behavioral science. We're going to talk about what those informal systems are at your company that channel behavior in certain ways, and therefore, how could you try to nudge or leverage those informal channels for better ethics and compliance? We've got a whole lot to go through, and Rebecca is going to take it for us and take us through that. Although, Rebecca, before we get to your slides, I wanted to start with a general question of, why are we talking about behavioral science in the first place? Like, what is the perspective that it brings to ethics and compliance programs that we would not otherwise have? Is there something that we're missing by not understanding this? Like, why are we here?
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt, for that question. And let me just start by saying thank you, Nick and Ethico, for having me today. I'm Rebecca Ream. Common mispronunciation, it's Ream, not Rem. So yeah, thanks for the question, Matt. So the way I think about it is this. In ethics and compliance, we're trying to get people to do the right thing, follow our policies, and speak up if they have concerns. And we generally want to follow those 7 elements of an effective program, our government guidance that says, okay, you set up governance and a code and policies and you train people on them. And if you do those things, you're likely to have an effective program. And what I think the reason I want to talk about behavioral science today is because just telling people what they're supposed to do does not necessarily make them do it. And a lot of the reason for that can be explained by behavioral science and the cognitive biases that we kind of forget we have or maybe don't know we have. So I think it's an important tool to understand the really root cause of human behavior to ensure our programs are effective.
I mean, notice though what Rebecca said. When she gave the elevator pitch for the mandate of ethics and compliance, it was not, the first sentence was not, you have to know all those regulations. You said we need to drive the right behaviors in the organization. And like, we can't compel anybody to do anything. They have to voluntarily follow the code and voluntarily follow the policies. They have to voluntarily show up for work. So if we're not, complementing or building a skill set in behavioral science, which is all about, to Rebecca's point, why people do what they do. And we're not deconstructing and figuring out how we can hack those systems into human beings whose participation in our program is necessary, to Rebecca's point, for us to do our jobs, then we're leaving a ton of impact on the table. And so we have to complement our, legal mind, our regulation, our, knowledge of the business with how people actually behave if we're going to increase the odds of us driving those right behaviors in the organization.
Yeah, I just want to chime in one quick point, because I was going to make a joke where, Rebecca, you said just somebody telling them what to do doesn't mean that they'll do it. And my first thought was, as every parent knows. But
absolutely.
That is, so anybody who would say, why is this not important? No parent would ever actually think behavioral science is unimportant. You might not know that's what you're actually thinking about, but all the time you're thinking, how do I get my kid to actually do this thing that I'm telling them to do, to keep the whole household clean or safe or whatever, or the kids not burning the house down? Like, this is an inherently important thing that we all know individually. I find so much wisdom for ethics and compliance can actually just come from thinking through, how would I manage a bunch of 6 or 8 or 2-year-olds to get them to do this? Same lessons apply to adults in a corporate world. But anyways.
Absolutely. Yeah. With 3 teenagers, I am with you, Matt.
My kids aren't even there yet. I don't want to know. I'm afraid to ask. But you do have some presentation slides, so go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Yeah, I do have some slides. I thought it was helpful to kind of frame the conversation and show some examples. So I'll jump right into it and happy to answer any questions anyone has. Let me start by giving you a little background on me. I am a compliance officer at Olympus Corporation here in the Americas. I've been with Olympus about 7 years. And if you aren't familiar with Olympus, we're a medical device company. Previously, we had a camera business. You may be familiar with that. That did spin off a number of years ago. So we're pure med tech now. We mostly manufacture and sell endoscopes. I have over 70% market share of GI endoscopes. Our global headquarters is in Japan with about 30,000 employees worldwide. And our annual revenue is about $6.5 billion. And of course, the information I'm presenting today is my own and does not represent Olympus. So with that said, so talking more about, Matt, to your question, why are we talking about this today? Why is this important? A lot of it comes from our biases. When humans were evolving and we were on the Sahara and the lions were chasing us, right? We needed some survival skills. And we evolved with certain skills that helped us survive, that are still with us today, but, hey, we're not being chased by lions. So some of these things, for example, are around the need to act fast. we need to make decisions with very limited information. And so our brains have evolved to be able to do that, but it's imperfect. There's too much information in the world. How do we select what's the important information? So we tend to filter it out. A very important thing in behavioral science. And then kind of trying to figure out what to remember. So all of these things that helped us have survival skills for our, days of back in evolution and running from lions are still with us and can explain a lot of the strange things that humans do, because humans actually act irrationally a lot of the time. So one of those cognitive biases is this present bias. So I like these cartoons. They're by sketchplanations.com. There are a ton of them on there. They're open for use as long as you reference them. So feel free to check that out. The present bias says we think about, when we're in the present, we think about the future, and we have we kind of assume different things that are going to happen in the future. So the present bias is we think only of the immediate risks and those benefits outweighing the long term. So in this case, it's a Monday. This person says, oh, I'm planning to eat fruits and vegetables all week because I know that is healthy. Oh, but there's this big piece of cake. Well, I'm just going to eat it today on Monday. I'm going to eat fruits and vegetables the rest of the week. And that is what we tell ourselves, but it doesn't necessarily happen to all of us, those of us who struggle with overeating sometimes. Similarly, moral blindness is a bias that we have. We assume we're going to act more ethically than we actually do. If you ask someone, what would you do in this situation? They tell you one thing, and then when the situation comes up, they often do another. And this is because we have these biases about what we think we'll do and what the future might hold. There are biases.
There's a close cousin to that, which is kind of moral overconfidence. And I find that moral overconfidence kind of skyrockets as you go up in an organization. So if you're talking to a CEO, they tend to think, not me, of course, not me. They tend to think like, oh, well, I'm an ethical person. I would only hire ethical people. We have a great screening process. We don't have any of those bad apples in the organization. And I think, to your exact point, in the moment, in the gray, people make all kinds of different decisions. And so the odds of us, having leaders who have properly calibrated the level of, ethics in the organization is very low.
Yeah, I love that point, Nick. And what it reminds me of is another thing about leadership. So there are studies that show that when people are in leadership positions, they get this increase in dopamine, right? People look to them. And we may have talked about this previously, but and that can actually make them make bad decisions, honestly. And so there's a technique where leaders they should expose themselves to areas where they don't feel powerful and remember their faults and things like that. And that can kind of lower that dopamine and have them be better leaders and make better decisions. So leadership is absolutely key in this for sure. So thinking about all these biases, that leads us to behavioral science, which is the study, of course, of, why people do what they do. My favorite definition is it's the science of what humans do, why we do it, and how we can be influenced. So what I want to do today is, with Matt and Nick's help and great insight, is share some of that general research that's out there about human behavior, and then turn to how we can utilize that in ethics and compliance programs in some really practical ways, hopefully. So starting with one of my favorite behavioral scientists, Dan Ariely. This is a great TED Talk. I'm not going to play it today, but I encourage you to find this, available on YouTube. So he's a professor of psychology at Duke. And what he says in this TED Talk is, just giving people information doesn't change behavior. What does change behavior is changing the environment. And we do that by decreasing friction and increasing motivation. And he gives some great examples about that. So what I want to do is talk about how do we decrease friction, make things easier, and increase motivation. Let me go ahead there. So a couple of fun examples from the research in my mind, as far as reducing friction, making things easier. On the left, you'll see nudge. So Matt mentioned nudging. This is a common behavioral science technique to just give a little push for people in a certain direction. The key is a nudge cannot be required, and it can't have some monetary, big value attached to it. It has to just be an optional push in one direction that people can choose if they want. So in this case, the Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam was having some issues in their men's restroom with spillage around the urinals. So they decided to do a study and see if they could improve this. And what they did was they put a fly decal in the urinals as a target. And what they found was that they had 80% reduction in spillage with the fly decal. Now, I'm so glad I was not the person who had to measure that, but they had that outcome. And it's just amazing. One little fly decal, and it changed people had a target. They were nudged.
Yeah, men love aiming at something. You know what I mean?
Apparently. So another one on the right, social proof. So this is a really key piece of behavioral science. People, crowd mentality, people do what they see and hear others doing. And so in this example, the Holiday Inn wanted to reduce their costs of laundering towels from their hotels. And they wanted to, help the environment as well, reduce the water usage. And so what they did was they did an experiment, and they put up signs, different signs in various rooms in the hotel. And some of those signs said, hey, help save the environment. Reuse your towel, hang it up, and we won't wash it, and that should help the environment. In other rooms, they said 75% of the people who stayed in this room reused their towel. Please reuse your towel, hang it up so we don't have to wash it. And what they found is they looked at the percentage of people who reused their towels in these two in this experiment. Those in the help save the environment, 35% of them reused their towels. In the people staying in this room did this, 49% reused. So seeing that social proof, hey, other people here in this room are reusing, influenced people to do the behavior that was wanted in Holiday Inn. So I like that example.
Yeah, and I love kind of how can we leverage this kind of stuff to drive more of the behaviors we want. So some vendors will do something like this on their invoices. They will say, please join the 78% of clients who pay their bill within the first 30 days. Okay. You also can do it with respect to Speak Up, and you can say, please, be part of the 85% of employees who speak up every single year, right? Put out some kind of a number that's going to drive that behavior and create some tailwinds for yourself. Because again, we as human beings, we're, back to your analysis or your example about being in the Sahara with lions and stuff, we're responding to stimulus. We're responding to all these stimuli around us. And so how can we take a high agency approach and create some stimulus that's going to subversively or subconsciously drive that right behavior? Those little hints, those little nudges can really do a lot. And think about some, fly stickers in the urinals at work, maybe.
Rebecca, I did want to see if I could try to tie some of this material more closely to ethics and compliance programs. At a gut level, all of this makes sense. And I had even written down some notes here where you said the information might be useful, but people won't necessarily have it stick. And I was like, information, well, that equals policy. That's what the policy is. It's just information. But a policy alone does not get people to do things. And then I was thinking, okay, well, the environment and making them do something, that's really procedure. And I'm trying to think of what other sort of good examples, and Nick just gave a few of them, what would be examples of these concepts in ethics and compliance? I'm also very struck by the word friction there, which is a procedure that doesn't work very well. And that, I think, is why a lot of people don't listen to the compliance program. It's not because they are inherently evil and hate ethics and compliance. It's because compliance makes things hard to do. That's a friction-filled procedure. How do you simplify it? What would you say to these kind of things?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking, Matt, is simplifying, right? So we know that you might have a policy and procedure, but do people first of all, do they know where they are, right? Can they even access them? Once they access them, do they understand them, right? And so I have an example later that I can talk about, which is that there was a study that showed that policies that have many components and many connections to other policies actually were more likely to be violated than very simple policies. So one thing, a fairly simple thing I think we could do is if you look at, do a review of your policies. If you have policies that really have two or more parts to them that really could be separated out, make them separate policies. They could have the same language. It's just two documents versus one. So that's as far as simplifying the language, simplifying the number of components and the connections to other policies. Some people they don't understand. They don't understand the policy. There's a training on it. They don't understand that. And if they're not even understanding the guidance, then it's going to be hard for them to do the right thing. So I think that's a simple way.
If our job is to drive behavior, then part of our job is to make it easy to do the right thing. Well, then people have to understand, to your point, they have to understand what that right thing to do is. And I think part of removing friction, to Matt's point and Matt's question, is making it easy for folks to digest and understand, what they need to do. And I think when we can begin with that end in mind, begin with that end user in mind, it's a little bit easier to have some empathy and the belief that people are not necessarily, fighting intentionally against compliance. They're usually well-intending people, and there's usually, a component of like ignorance in the mix. And if we can take it upon ourselves to say like, okay, the ignorance that exists out there is a function of how I've rolled this information out. Well, then that gives us a lot more flexibility and grace to make alterations to that and break that 5-part policy into 2 easy to digest policies, or, whatever the case might be,
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that comes to mind is that this concept of too much information, right? There's way too much information out there for our employees to be able to understand and know all of it, right? And none of us can. I'm reviewing our policies all the time because I forget all the details in them. So one thing to consider is, instead of giving the whole policy as the training or whatever, or a very long LMS about the policy, how do you pull out just the most important nuggets so that they know the key pieces? And if they have questions, they know who to contact about everything else, versus dumping 100% of the policy content into an LMS. Our brains cannot process it. We with too much information, we filter it out. So I think that's so key, is pulling out key points, 3 key points for every policy or whatever it is. And questions, you want to see more, you can read it. But I think that's one of the biggest things we can do, is reduce the content.
Here are 2 great observations from the listeners here. One saying pretty much what you were just mentioning here, Rebecca. I find that individuals don't respond well to written materials. They stop at the first few sentences. That is probably true. And that is the 3 bullet points at the top that Rebecca had just mentioned. And another person who I think is a very astute observation here, I like to say, if you don't have the time to do it right the first time, when will you have time to come back and do it again?
Great point.
Excellent point to raise to people who don't like compliance. But if they say, I don't have time to do it right the first time, think about, well, what is this procedure? Could we simplify it for them? They're giving a useful data point. Either they're right, this procedure is too complex, or they're wrong, they just can't be bothered, and you need more training or an intervention of some kind. But somebody who says something like that back to you, it is worth pulling on that thread, seeing where it goes. But some good comments here.
Yeah, and I love that comment, and I'm glad you raised it, Matt, because I think we need to, I think sometimes in ethics and compliance, someone says, oh no, I didn't do the right thing because I forgot about what was in the policy, or it was hard to understand. And we might sometimes say, hey, that's your job. You got to read the policy, you got to understand it. If you don't understand, you got to ask questions. Well, let's look at it from a different lens. We're all human. We all have trouble understanding whatever the thing is, how our washing machine works, or whatever the thing is. And if we accept that that is a human condition and try to work within that, versus forcing someone to understand something that maybe is, really complex, I think that's a really key way to approach, employee behavior as well. So moving on to a couple more research examples, and then we'll get to more of the ethics and compliance examples. So this is around increasing motivation, and it's around setting expectations and this concept of reciprocity. So in this experiment at MIT, they did an experiment with beer and MIT students. I think it was a very popular experiment. They had 2 pints of beer, and they told some of them, pint A and pint B, please try them, and whichever one you like, you get a free one. We're not going to tell you what's in them. Others, they said, pint A is Budweiser and pint B is Budweiser plus some vinegar. Try them both and tell us which one you like. Interestingly, what happened was, for the ones who didn't know what was in each beer, they tried them and they actually preferred the Budweiser plus vinegar and asked for that free pint, which I don't know what that says about Budweiser. But for those they told you have Budweiser or you have Budweiser plus vinegar, of course, all of us would think, ooh, vinegar and beer, it's not going to taste good. I'm not going to like that. They drank both, and lo and behold, they liked the Budweiser better and wanted that free pint. So the point here is setting expectations actually impacts behaviors and perceptions. And so I think it's a key concept to keep in mind when we're thinking about rolling out compliance training or setting expectations around behavior. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Was somebody going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, this is so big. I mean, I was in the chat just now talking to Eli about this Robert Cialdini book called, I mean, a lot of this came from, I think, Influence. And then his follow-up book is Persuasion, which is all really about this concept of like, how do we frame out a persuasion path prior to that persuasion happening? Right? Like that happens with movie trailers, right? Before we go see the movie, we see the trailer and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this. And you're sitting there in anticipation, you know, if you're like me, crushing an entire bucket before the previews are over, waiting for that movie to happen, right? How can, you know, and I think we do a lot to create headwinds for ourselves with respect to the expectations when we put something out. Hey, you know, hey, sorry, stupid question. Hey, sorry to interrupt. You know, sorry, this training's going to be over quickly. What message is that sending? That's sending a message that like this is going to suck. When somebody thinks it's going to suck, the odds of them disengaging are so much higher and so forth. So what can we do on the front end to influence those expectations, to make those connections so that the behaviors that, you know, ensue are more in line with what we hope for, right? So I just think there's so much power in this persuasion, how we can frame something out early on, because that has such a disproportionate impact on the impression that is left with someone. I mean, we're talking about first impressions to some degree. So when we frame that out and we tell them, you know, if I give my kids some, you know, tater tots and I say, and there's veggies hidden in them, versus me just saying, here are some tater tots, which one do you think they're going to not want? They're going to be like, these taste like broccoli. It's like, no, they don't. They taste like potatoes. So we have to be smart about what impression someone is going to get from how, from the expectations we allow them to have prior to the engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it makes me think of is I run our compliance session at our annual sales meeting every year. And last year we did based on late night talk shows. So we did these, you know, really funny scripts. We had a great employee who was our writer and really made it fun. And we started the session by saying, we had a great session for you. We're so excited about this. And we had energy and it went so well. You know, it really came off well. So we have to believe that what we're doing is good. And we have to communicate that and set those great expectations. So let me go to my reciprocity example with the Andes candies. If anybody has ever been to Olive Garden, you have probably seen that they leave little Andes candies with the bill. Well, Olive Garden did an experiment with this. They tested out how leaving the candies would impact people getting tips, the servers and the tips they would get. So they had some tables where the servers left no candies. They had some where they left one little pile with the bill, and they had some where they left the pile with the bill and they came back a second time and gave the customers more. And what they found was the more candy, the more tips. And this is reciprocity. When people get something, when they get a gift or something done for them, they're more likely to comply and do what is asked of them. This is why nonprofits send us the free address labels, because we've gotten a gift, makes us more likely to give them a donation when they ask for one. So I think this is a really important part of something we can utilize in ethics and compliance. So I think that hopefully you're getting the idea here. There's a lot of information in behavioral science we can leverage in ethics and compliance. And what you can see here are a lot of examples of articles, these mostly from 2022, 2023. And what I want to point you to, the one at the top left, the IBE webinar, Recording Ethics, Do We All Need a Nudge? I highly recommend you check this out. If you Google it, you'll find it. It's freely available. And in this, the IBE, an organization in London, they had some various people on, really smart people. And GSK, the behavioral scientist from GSK, was on and talked about their program. And I'm going to share some examples of that. So great resources out there. And what I would say is I did a quick search. I know some companies are using behavioral science for sure. So I did a quick search on LinkedIn. Okay, what people out there have this title and where do they work? So Novartis has behavioral scientists. GSK has them, the World Bank and Philips for sure, a lot of other smaller companies too. But this is a role that's a part of ethics and compliance in a number of companies. And so I think something to consider if you're in that space.
Yeah, and if you don't have that role, you shouldn't feel bad about it. It is what it is. This is a relatively new profession. You know, I mean, this profession hasn't been around for, 5,000 years. So, and also think about how our economy has changed. It's changed from an industrial economy to a knowledge work economy where machines were the assets and now people are the assets. And so the assets that create value and drive enterprise value in our companies those have moved into the human realm from the machine realm. And so those are different types of machines. We have to understand how those are wired and how those engines work and how those machines work. So if you haven't if you don't have a behavioral scientist on your team, fine, all good. Come to the Ethicsverse, read these books that people are putting into the chat, and start getting smart on it, because it really is the fulcrum, that our impact kind of hinges on.
For whatever it's worth, I would also say, if you are wondering where you could get behavioral science expertise, call your local business school. They will have a small contingent of professors, I am sure, who are eager to look for case studies. If they could conduct an experiment on your workforce or something like that, they're also happy to do consulting for a fee if you had the budget. But there are resources out there, and there are professors who devote their whole career with a battalion of grad students trying to think up innovative things they would love to try somewhere in the real world. And it's a point that a smaller company might want to consider.
Yeah, great point, Matt. And there are lots of free resources. Harvard Business Review, I read a lot of their articles. They're nice and short, and they give links to the research. So it's a great way to learn more about this.
But you know what? You don't have to be overwhelmed by it. Yes, there's a ton of research, but just start getting involved. I mean, you start reading any of these books, or you read any of these articles that Rebecca just referenced, your brain is going to start making those connections, and you're going to start finding opportunities to implement these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So diving into ethics and compliance and how do we utilize this information, right? I have three kind of principles I think about when I'm thinking about behavioral science and ethics and compliance programs. One, how can we make the right behavior easy, hopefully even the default? Two, how can we use social proof? And three, how can we make sure that our incentives are lined up? We have the right motivation. So those are three key concepts, I think, when we're talking about this. So a couple of examples of the way we can do this. Research shows on the left there, nudging to training completion. Research shows that when people see the progress on their, let's say, LMS that they're doing, oh, you're 76% complete, or you're, it's on slide 12 of 20 or whatever, it actually nudges them to completion. A very simple thing, likely, that you could implement in PowerPoint presentations or hopefully LMS programs to show that percent completion, because people are more likely to complete when they see that. On the right there, simplifying policies. So this was the comment I gave earlier, which was that there was a restaurant that had a health inspection, and they did a study around it. And what they found was those policies that had more components, were more complex, and were more connected to other policies were the most likely ones to be broken. And so again, simplifying those policies, simpler language, fewer connections to other policies can help people understand them better. Yeah.
Well, no, I just wanted to, while the thought is in my head, I would say, I was really intrigued by the policies part and the structure of it. And in the past, I know we have had Ethicsverse sessions that were wholly devoted just to policy management, policy structure, things like that. And I have thought about how technology these days can lend itself more to the points that you're making, Rebecca, about how to create more of like an interactive policy manual as opposed to a PDF, or even worse, a printed out thicket of paper that's 2 inches thick and the person has to read. But there are now many ways of interactive design where you could actually have policies that you can help facilitate get exactly to where the person wants to go. It becomes much more easy to design them in a more cool graphical way, but free them from all of the other clutter that might have existed in a PDF policy document we all signed in 2008. Stuff like that. There are ways now to really harness the idea here.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The technology is key. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and there's also like a branding opportunity in shifting away from the 50-page document or the PDF to something that's more interactive, to your point. Because how do people consume information now? It's very different than our parents or grandparents, right? Like the way we consume information, there's a lot more video. It's a lot smaller, a lot shorter form things, right? The bar for what is like an acceptable thing to view has dropped significantly. So if we're not pivoting into that and taking advantage of that, democratization of media, so to speak, and we're not changing how we show up and engage with our workforce, well, then that also sends a message. If we're still putting out phone books instead of an online directory, well, that sends a message as to like whether we're, with it or not, if we're laggards or if we're innovators. And so to Matt's point, there's a lot of free resources out there for you to start playing around with this kind of stuff. But again, it starts with us, and it starts with our belief that says, hey, we're at this sort of chapter change. We're at this inflection point in our industry, and what got us here isn't going to get us to where we want to go. And for us to take advantage of this new era of ethics and compliance, it's going to cause us to do, we have to do things differently. It means we have to start with a different mindset. We have to understand and believe this universal law of reaping and sowing. And if we put good things out there over time, those things are going to take root, and those things are going to turn into a harvest. But we cannot just keep putting one foot in front of the other and expect to really ascend this mountain. We have to be able to pivot accordingly. And Matt, to your point, we're driving behavior. We have to understand what's going to resonate with folks, and we have to make compliance easy, as it's been said in the chat.
Yeah. And what it makes me think of is, an example of how I learn every day, right? So I had my dryer had some like lint issue or something like that. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do about this? It's not functioning. So I went online, I found a YouTube video for 3 minutes, and I watched, how do I fix this issue with my dryer? And it is such a key thing. This is what we all do now, right? Are we really expecting our employees to have the printed phone book of all policies, sitting next to their desk and memorizing it so that when a question comes up, they'll know? No, it's going to happen in the time that they need it. They're going to be like, oh, I don't know the answer to this. Where do I find the answer? And they're going to look for it, and they're going to look for it in bite-sized, information. They don't want to watch another 30-minute LMS or whatever. So how do we give people the information they need in a way that they want to receive it, given where we are with technology and everything these days? So absolutely agree. Okay, a couple other examples using social proof. So this is one of those GSK examples that was in that webinar on the left. What they did was they used 4 different types of messages to see what would lead to better training completion for their ethics and compliance training. And so there was a standard message, hey, you have training due, finish it by this date. And then one of the messages was based on social norms. They said, hey, over half our colleagues have now completed the mandatory training. Why don't you do it too? Here's the link. And what they found was that messaging increased the training completion over the standard message. On the right, of course, we've already talked about leaders. Leader modeling is so key. One, example that probably everybody on the line who has a code, you probably have your CEO or president's picture there and a message from them, because leader modeling is key in this. And leaders can do that in a code. They can do it when they're doing a town hall, right? Talking about maybe they've been in situations, difficult situations, and how did they decide, to do the right thing, and what did they do? Talking about that is great modeling.
Yeah, and how can we affect these things? When in our pre-show, we were talking a little bit about, we mentioned before this sort of ethical overconfidence. And we also talked about there's not many CEOs that at least would admit that they don't care about ethics, right? They're all at least going to say that they care about it. And so I'm just saying that if you're dealing with someone that probably has an ethical overconfidence, that probably has 100 different things that are coming at them, and that their endorsement or their support from a tone from the top perspective really is a tailwind for the kind of impact that you're trying to have. Well, then how can you get on that person's radar and make it easy for them to kind of do this leadership modeling? Well, you can give them a talk track. You can give them a little blurb to say, and they'll put their own spin on it. But make it, giving someone a blank page versus giving them something to react to. The latter is always so much easier, and it's so much easier to get some kind of action on. So providing a script or tapping that leader or that middle manager or somebody else in the organization who wants to exhibit this kind of behavior, being open to them, doing it and making it easy to activate them can do a lot to pull more of this leader modeling that can have a disproportionate influence on the behaviors that you're trying to have. In this training completion thing, how much does that cost to type those words? That's easy.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All these things are small little tweaks to how we end up showing up to the business that can drive, again, disproportionate impact, a disproportionate change in the slope of our, compliance or ethical culture across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So another example, again, this was shared in this IBE webinar around GSK and their code. So what they did was they kind of had their electronic code training, I believe it was. And at the end, they asked people to click a button to say, I'm in, I commit to following the code. And that did a couple of things. When they clicked the button, I'm in, they then were able to submit their name. And then there was this wall of names that appeared. So it does two things. One is it shows the social proof. Oh, look, all these other people committed to the code too. I'm in the main group. That's great, right? The other thing is, behavioral science research tells us that if somebody commits to something, they sign their name to something, they say, yeah, I'm going to commit to this, it's more likely they're going to follow through, because of course, we all want to be the people we say we want to be.
That internal
right?
consistency is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We try to do that on the Ethicsverse. I mean, some people come to the Ethicsverse and I think they mute it and they just want to be here for the chat. Like our chat in the Ethicsverse is popping off and everyone's participating. And when there's a new person who comes, they feel like, oh, look, everyone's already in the pool. Like if you're having a pool party, you got to have a couple people in the pool when people start showing up. Otherwise, no one's going to get in. You show up at a pool party, nobody wants to be the first one in. And so this kind of a thing, clicking I'm in, generating, creating, synthesizing this social proof can do a lot we're herd animals, right? Can do a lot to pull people into those behaviors. But again, we have to be a little bit creative and we have to be in an experimentation mode and look for those feedback loops to see, is this meeting my expectation? Is this behavior starting to change in aggregate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our next example, as I said, Novartis uses behavioral science. Gartner has this on their kind of public website. You need to get a membership to kind of read the full article. But essentially, Novartis did a very similar thing that GSK did. They did a randomized controlled trial where they had, I think in their case, 3 different messages for training reminders. And I'm really glad that they did this, and GSK has done this as well, because one thing to keep in mind is there has been some controversy around behavioral science research. There have been some questions around the data and the validity of it and the ability to repeat the same experiments and get the same outcomes. So I think it's really important that we don't, all rush out. You find one article or one behavioral science research example and that shows that something was valid, and then you change your whole program based on that. I would not do that, right? I would test things out. Some things are really simple. Like you said, Nick, sending a different message as a reminder, pretty easy, not a big cost. But if you're going to actually take all of your LMSs for your trainings and shorten them all because you think that's better for behavioral science, that's a big investment. And so what I would suggest is you test it out, you pilot, and you see, okay, our normal LMS is 30 minutes. We're going to do one that's 5 minutes, and we're going to give people a message that says, hey, we shortened this because we respect your time and we want to give you just the essential content you need. And then you test it out. You do an A and a B, with half the employees, and you see what's more effective. And because that's a big effort, and you don't want to, again, make huge testing it out and seeing if it's working, because every company's different, every employee base is different, and you want to make sure things are working. So with Novartis, they did 3 messages. One was their standard, hey, do your training. One was a social norms-based message that said, hey, a lot of people have done their training. You should do it too. That increased training completion by 10%. And then they had a third message that was curiosity driven. It was something like, hey, we have really good content for you. We have some new information. We think it's really going to help you. And if you're into learning new stuff, this is good for you. And what they found was, I think that increased training completion a little, but what it really impacted was the retention. They did a test at the end, and those who had gotten the curiosity message had much better retention at the end, which I think is really interesting.
Well, again, that's just framing.
Yep.
Right? Like that's a true A/B test where the only difference is this message and how the training is framed out. And if it sparks that curiosity, I mean, that's kind of an anchoring effect, right? There's a famous study in that book, Influence, where they took groups of people and they had them guess the value of a mug or something like this. And what they found is that when people had to write down their social security number, and when those social security numbers started with a big number, they tended to guess that the mug cost a lot more because they were anchored to a bigger number. That happened on the subconscious level. So putting that curiosity statement, it does some machinations. It does some magic at the subconscious sort of system 1 level, to use the thinking fast and slow framework. It does some magic down there that causes a certain part of the brain to open up. Again, kind of the opposite of, hey, I'm sorry that you have to take the compliance training. Imagine if this is the blurb. Sorry, you have to take the compliance training again. You can do something else on the side as you kind of check the box and sit through this thing. What kind of engagement are you going to get there? So again, we can really influence a lot more than we have been historically within the behaviors of our employee base.
Yeah.
Rebecca, if I could just chime in with 2 quick thoughts here, a thought and a question. First, I wholly agree about the importance of trying to experiment and see what sticks and whatnot. And again, for anybody who's wondering, how could I find somebody to help me out with A/B testing or something? Your marketing team knows how to do this. Whatever we're going to come up with, they've already done it for years. And I don't know, buy the marketing department some donuts, ask to borrow one of their interns and see if they could help you mock up an experiment. But they absolutely would be invaluable at these communication experiments and outreach. But my question was more, could you talk a bit about how much we know this behavioral science does or doesn't apply across, say, different cultures or geographic boundaries? And because as soon as I started thinking about testing, it's like, well, you could wind up with a very different set of answers for your EMEA region or Japan and Asia Pacific versus North America that we're anchored to, we're biased to. So that was another question I was wondering, how much do we know that this extends across large swaths of the human race?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. And I would say I don't have a solid answer for you. Certainly the research I saw was not just localized in the US for sure. I mean, some I'm sure was, but I've definitely seen research globally. The Ethics and Compliance Initiative does their Global Business Ethics Survey, and research out of that shows leaders, modeling has a great impact on integrity behaviors. So there definitely is cross-cultural and cross-regional information around this, but I wouldn't say that every technique that we're talking about today is necessarily going to work cross-regionally. So yeah, it's a great call out, and again, another reason to test things. Another thing that comes to mind is, when we talk about different, cultural differences, regional differences, I've read some research around, obviously we need to be cognizant of this, but what some research has found as far as those differences is the differences between cultures tend to be much greater with the socioeconomic differences within a certain culture. So for example, it could be that, people who are corporate executives in China and in the US are much more similar culturally than someone who's a corporate executive in China and someone who has a blue collar job in China. So I think we need to recognize there are cultural differences, but not all of them are regional based, right? Some of them are socioeconomic or other ways. So, but great call out.
I would say though that if we're just talking about the book Influence, which I think does a good job of capturing these sort of 6 major aspects of what persuasion or what kind of influence is, what are they? It's liking, it's reciprocity, it's scarcity, it's social proof, it's consistency, and it's authority. And I think while there are absolutely cultural differences, I think what folks who have rolled out codes of conduct, for example, across the world have found is that whether you're living on one side of the world or the other, we still care about the same kinds of things, right? We want to leave the world better for our families. We care about relationships. We care about, doing the right thing at the core. That might show up in different ways. But if you look back to these 6 sort of main, pillars, like people respond to authority on any side of the world. People like to do business with and, have relationships with people they like. I think all human beings have this desire for internal consistency. All human beings, regardless of culture, are subject to cognitive biases and subject to rationalizations. And I think because we're all kind of herd animals, regardless of where we live in time or in the world, we do respond to that sort of herd mentality, that social proof thing. So again, we may have to kind of massage it a little bit. We may have to change some of the phraseology, but I think these aspects of behavioral science, I think they are kind of tied primarily to the human condition more than anything else. And that approach of constant improvement or continuous improvement and experimentation, as Rebecca said, I think is the key to figuring out what mix of approaches are going to be best for your business and for your, the groups that you're over.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple more examples here. So we already talked about setting expectations and presentations. Say, hey, I have a great presentation for you. Don't say, I'm so sorry, I'll try to get out quickly so you can get back to lunch, or it's just, set the right expectation. And do that also for behaviors. So when we set realistic high expectations for behavior, for example, I try to say to the employees I support hey, we know you work hard to do the right thing, and it's not always easy. So here's some information to help you be successful. And what I'm saying in there is, I expect you to be successful. I expect you to meet our standard. I know it's not easy, so we're going to help you get there. And if you set those high expectations, people are more likely to follow through on them, because that, the behavioral science tells us that. And then just to follow up on that GSK example, one of the 4 messages they sent was about reciprocity. And this one was, hey, over the last year, we've been working to create this really important learning experience that's really valuable for you. By completing it, you're going to get the information you need. Click here to complete. And that actually was most successful in leading to training completion, even more so over the social proof message. So I thought that was really interesting.
So again, this is a high agency approach to making sure that we are, that GSK's team was, getting credit for all the good stuff that they were doing behind the scenes. We have to put that stuff out there. We have to remind people what our role is. Our role is not to slow the freaking business down and make everyone's lives more difficult. Our role is to de-risk the business and make it easier to run down the path of commerce. That's what the role is. And I think if we're not taking credit for that, and we're not constantly reminding folks of that, they're never going to learn that song. They're never going to learn that harmony if they're not hearing it enough,
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And last content slide here is just an example of Novartis's code. It's available online. And right there, under with the red line, is that they utilize behavioral science in their program, and they put that out there for their employees. And so I think that's important for us to know that companies are using this, right? We should consider using it too. And with their code, they talk about, we use ethical underpinnings and things like that. So again, with that consistency, Nick, that you talked about, if we think of ourselves as ethical people, I would think if Novartis employees that think of themselves as ethical people and they read this, they're like, oh yeah, I'm ethical. Let me follow this, right? And it's kind of that commitment and consistency.
So, Rebecca, here are a couple of questions or comments I wanted to read out from some of the audience over the last 20 minutes or so. But since you just had that slide up about reciprocity, here was one on that point in a slightly different context. But they did say reciprocity can be a powerful force in regulatory compliance. The director is non-compliant, doesn't matter why, they're in trouble with the firm. You, the compliance officer, can either beat them up, or you can help them dig out of the problem they are in, and then they will be forever in your debt. And that can create some long-term relationships. And certainly, I think that is it's an excellent point. Mm-hmm. Somebody else who wrote in saying, should we, in all caps, so I guess we is the compliance officer, should we be embedding short videos into our policy PDF documents? That's not so difficult to do. I don't know.
Yes.
Rebecca, either
yes.
You or Nick have thoughts. Yes?
I mean, why not? To your point, it's not hard to do. You can do it on your phone. And this is not 1997 anymore, where you look at a video and you're like, oh, look at the production value on this. This sucks. This doesn't deserve my time. People are spending hours laying in bed watching TikToks of people singing in their car or crying in their car, or, shaky cam. Like, the democratization of media allows for us to take advantage of these technologies and these ways to deliver information in multiple ways. The more ways that we can resonate with a diverse audience, the better, I think. Obviously, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. But again, start experimenting with it. Start experimenting with short videos. Like, you can download CapCut, or you can download InShot. You can use just the TikTok app and download those videos. Like, people will watch them. And I just think we have to change it up if we're going to drive that actual behavior. And something back to the reciprocity thing. Have you ever heard that saying that says, if you want a friend, you should be a friend? Like, if you move into my neighborhood, guess what I'm doing? I'm showing up with a tuna casserole. Okay. I'm going to bring you a nice casserole, and we're going to be friends. So how can we bring a casserole to somebody else within the organization to drive those behaviors and create that indebtedness? That's kind of a crude way to say it, but that's what the reciprocity is. We are all wired. We are all wired for that. We want to be good citizens, to each other in the communities that we're a part of. So taking on, hey, how can I help dig you out of this, versus, back to Matt's point, hammering you for messing something up, can do a lot. That is an implicit expression of reciprocity that you can do, that you can add a lot of value to somebody's life with.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to your question about videos, Matt, and thank you to the person who asked that. What I would say is, yes, I would try videos, right? Because we all consume content in videos. But I would first start with, how are your employees consuming information now? Like, what is the way that they get their information? And then how do we put our information in that method? Because they're likely calling their manager, or texting their manager or something. And so maybe the managers are the ones who need that information. I wouldn't assume that videos are going to work for everybody. The other thing I would say is, I think short videos work for simple information. I've seen videos going badly when you have a very complex policy you're rolling out and you do a 10-minute video with like bullets and all that, and it's just too much. It's not the way people need to digest that much information, right? So I think it's, videos can be used in great ways in certain circumstances.
Here's another question. Making compliance stick means making it easy. Yes, correct. This means making compliance systems and controls simple. So how do we make complex regulation easy and simple to understand? And it kind of veers into what we had talked about before, that policy management is its own Ethicsverse session some other day. But just quickly, Rebecca and Nick, how would you think about how to distill out the key points from, they're not wrong. A lot of policy or a lot of regulation is quite complex and you have to come up with something simple. How do you do it?
Mm-hmm. What comes to mind for me is I really tried to distill, I would say I try to give principles, and we did this in our code, right? Because if people know the principles, then they can infer what the policy might be. Our sales reps interact with physicians, and we need to be very careful about transfers of value to physicians. So one of our principles is any transfer of value has to be a fair market value. Now, it doesn't give the exact amount for every policy, but if we stick with principles, then people can be like, oh, wait a minute, somebody wants to pay that doctor a lot. That might not align with things. Let me call my compliance officer and ask. So that's a thought.
Yeah, I think the principles is absolutely the right thing, because if you're not managing through principles, then you have to manage through a complete articulation of every single possibility, which is absolutely wild, right? That's insane. No one's going to take any action on that. So I think that principle approach, phenomenal. Being able to tie every policy back to some value or some principle can, to Rebecca's point, allow people to, infer what that actual policy might be. I would also say to try to marry the Pareto principle and some empathy. So Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule, and some empathy to say a salesperson who's out in the field in some other country, they probably don't have to know all the ins and outs of what the American law is, unless that's actually the governing policy over there. So we need to take, kind of a common sense approach to it. And how can you boil the policy down? You could use AI for this. We've helped some folks for this. This is not that revolutionary, but hey, here's my policy, and it's going to these three different groups. Give me 100-word summary of this policy as it would apply to sales, or as it would apply to safety, or whatever. And that's going to give you some ideas of how you can distill down to the main core, the big rocks of that policy, because the odds of them remembering all the litany is very low. The odds of them remembering a big concept or a big rock is obviously a lot higher. So you then can fix that branding problem. You can make it easier to digest. You can make the compliance easier without a bunch of brain damage,
Yeah,
I would just chime in. I like the whole idea of focusing on the principles, because you somewhat force senior managers' hands that they also have to focus on big principles and ethical culture, and gets them away from saying to the whole workforce, we do these picayune arcane things because regulatory compliance is what we have to do. And instead say, we're just focusing on, let's keep our eye on running a good business and not cheating. And there's a whole lot of details to that your compliance officer will tell you about later. But I, CEO, am keeping my eye on the big picture, do the right thing, I'm out. That's the sort of message you do want the leader to deliver. And the two feed on each other. I would just leave it at that. So we are pretty much out of time now, which is a shame, because we still have tons of great attendee chat and everything else. But Rebecca Ream from Olympus, thank you very much, Rebecca. This has been fascinating.
Let's see an emoji exploji for Rebecca. This was freaking awesome.
Is that the term now? The emoji exploji? And Nick, I don't know if you had any other comments or your closing remarks, but you can take it home.
Yeah, I just appreciate everyone coming. Invite your friends. Next week, we're on a little bit of a behavioral science kick, because I really feel like this next chapter, this next 10 years of our industry is going to look way different than the last 10 years if we can just do some little things to tweak our programs and bring some new mindsets and perspectives to our job. So next week we have the future of compliance, integrating tech, behavior, and ethics with the one and only Hema Lomax and the one and only Christian Hunt. So we're going to be diving deep on some more of these topics because this is really what's going to unlock us. We have to drive these behaviors in the organization, and we have to figure out how to pick these locks in a more sort of effective way. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for all you do every single week, every single day within your organizations. I know it can be a thankless job. I know it can be feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, but just keep in mind this universal law of reaping and sowing. These deposits you are making into the bank of equity, those will never come back void for you. So keep doing it. The things you do matter, and you have a whole community around you of other people who are fighting the good fight in their corner of the world. So love you all. We'll see you next Thursday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.